Time, the 49ers Rush Podcast. And here's your host, John Chapman.
What is going on, faithful? Today is going to be an absolute blast because who we got with us? Right next to me, the man, BD or Brian Peacock. How are we doing today, man?
I'm doing fantastic, John. It's been a little bit. I appreciate you inviting me back on. Our last meeting here on your podcast actually ended with my current Twitter avatar. It's been there for a little bit, probably since that episode happened. And
look at that.
It's me looking like I can't believe what somebody is saying when it actually was me just having an allergy attack on your show. If you remember?
I'm sure I said something ridiculous, and that's okay. Probably going to replicate. Perhaps we can create. That's the goal today, everybody in the chat. We've got to create a situation where Brian gets the best facial expression possible for another calendar year.
Yeah.
And I think today kind of set the stage a little bit. Now, for those of you who don't know, Brian Peacock, host of Locked On 49ers, Peacock and Williamson, absolute baller. One of the hardest people working in the business, man. I don't know. I always feel bad asking you to come on the show because I know you do 10 shows a week. It's impressive.
Yeah, I do a lot of podcasting, but it's a blessing. I love it. A lot of dad duty as well, and I'm able to carve out my own schedule too, so it allows me to do things like this. I don't have like the normal 9 to 5 hanging over my head where I can only fit this much time in. So it actually gives me a lot more time in a lot of ways because of what I do, which is awesome, and I can kind of set things up the way I want them to.
I like it. Now, today, a lot of bombshell dropped. A lot of them. Well, I don't even think it was really all that revelatory, but we're going to limit some quarterback talk. We got to jump into it a little bit, but it's going to be limited. Big Papa says, is there a way we can limit the quarterback controversy that doesn't exist? So just right off the bat, here we go. We've got to talk about this. And Hein brings in the comment, Brian, how do you feel about Sam Darnold and Trey Lance, the mention of both are going to get first team reps? I don't think they're going to be splitting. I think technically splitting, but the comment said they're both going to get some first team reps.
Yeah, and I think that's key because I didn't come away feeling like that 50-50 reps is what the situation was, and definitely not what it calls for, in my opinion, because it's a big difference between Trey Lance being QB1 or being QB3. Like that's huge. And if he's closer to QB3 than he is QB1, then that's a huge red flag that the 49ers are already telling us something big there. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think Sam Darnold's a safety net, and getting a few first team reps here and there doesn't mean he's actually splitting it. And it's a 50-50 competition between Trey Lance and Sam Darnold. And it definitely should not be that way. And that's not the vibe I got. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm not reading the situation correctly, but I didn't take what Kyle and John said this week at the owners' meetings to mean that it is a straight up competition for number 2. I think it's really clear that they laid it out, and it was, if the season started today, it's Brock Purdy, healthy, quarterback 1, and Trey Lance is behind him 2. And then just in case is what Sam Darnold is, especially with all that we've seen the 49ers go through and having a veteran on the roster, because Trey Lance and Brock Purdy combined haven't played a full season of NFL football. So they needed a veteran, and they found a guy that they liked, his ability to come in, that started games in the NFL, that didn't cost him an arm and a leg. But if he plays a lot, he'll get paid, more accordingly to being a high-end backup that he is.
Right.
So I think Sam Darnold's the clear 3 here. And I didn't read into it as being Trey versus Sam Darnold 50-50 split with the reps, just because Sam Darnold gets a few reps. But again, with this football team, I don't think you should ever be shocked if it's Brock Purdy week 1, if it's Trey Lance week 1, or if it's Sam Darnold week 1, or if it's QB4, who we haven't met yet, who's going to be on the roster, because you need that third camp arm, since Brock Purdy's not going to be able to open camp throwing the ball regularly with the 49ers. So who knows? Maybe it's the next Brock Purdy.
Oh, yeah. And there's going to be fun. I want to jump into that a little bit. But before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about some Sam Darnold talk. But before we do that, I want to kind of nail you down. Pick who you think, if you had to guess right now, who is starter week 1, snap 1, first offensive series? Who, in your opinion, is going to be that guy under center?
So I think it's going to be Trey Lance. And I don't think Trey Lance even has to be amazing for that to happen, because I think he's going to start with a lead and he'll either extend that lead or keep that lead over Sam Darnold throughout the spring and summer. And then there's such a high chance that Brock Purdy wouldn't be ready and available and have practiced enough to play week 1. And you got to see it through with Trey Lance in that scenario. So Trey Lance to me is the most likely, but then I think there's also a percentage chance that Trey Lance is traded at some point, during the draft, in which case that changes everything because he's not even on the roster. So if he's on the roster and he makes it through and he's not traded, Trey Lance is the guy that I'm going to put out there because I just don't know that Brock Purdy's 6-month timeline is going to put him in a position to even be able to play in week 1. And I think it's an opportunity. I kind of want to see it play out that way,
right?
Because I want to see Trey Lance get a true shot, just so we know. Because if you go into the season and it's Brock Purdy, you'll really never know what Lance could have been. And then by that time, Trey Lance is, his values completely shot. You're not going to be able to get anything in trade if he can't beat out Mr. Irrelevant for a starting job, and especially if you can't beat out Sam Darnold with what we've seen in his career. So then, it's pretty much over for Trey Lance and the 49ers at that point, and he'll end up on another roster in 2024 and maybe get a chance to start his career over. He's still pretty young, but he'll just have not played enough football for, I mean, it's crazy to think how different a world it was the last time Trey Lance played a full season of football. It was 2019. It was pre-pandemic. Like that felt like age. I feel like I've aged at least a decade since then. Since
you got a little gray coming in. You and me both, man.
Dude, you have a kid, you turn 40, pandemic, all at the same time in order, right? And it's just like,
and plus, let's be honest, the Niners don't offer any drama whatsoever in your daily content that you cover. It's all smooth sailing.
It's insane. I mean, in a lot of ways, thank you, John and Kyle, for giving us this endless content all offseason long, every offseason. It can't be easy with the 49ers. And, they're an awesome team to cover because they're a global audience. And you see it with, look how many people are in your live chat right now talking about the 49ers. There's so many passionate fans. It's such a great fan base. I grew up watching a bunch of, titles happening with the 49ers. They're a big market, big money football team in the NFL, and they're a good team. They've been to the NFC Championship game and in the Super Bowl 3 out of 4 or 5 years. It's just it's an unbelievable team to cover, and they're giving us so much with this quarterback stuff every offseason, and it's unbelievable. And it's unbelievable how different it can be every offseason, even though it's the same but different.
Right. Now here's the thing that, Brian, everybody, you've been doing this for a minute, and I appreciate what you do for the community. Now I'm going to be a little selfish here. Your shadow draft, I know it's kind of retired, but your shadow drafts back in the day were some of my favorite stuff that you ever really put out. I freaking love that stuff. I ate it alive. And I still get emails and they'll say like, oh, BD had this guy. And like, it's awesome because the community just 100% just like demolishes every single thing that you put out there, which is great. Where were you on Sam Darnold? If you had to go back in your time machine and it was the Rosen, Darnold, and all those guys, were you high on him coming out of USC?
I was high on Sam Darnold. I was actually critical of the Giants for taking a running back over a potential franchise quarterback in Sam Darnold. And look, they haven't won a ton of games with Saquon Barkley either, even though Saquon Barkley's been a better player than Sam Darnold has, obviously, than Sam Darnold was for the Jets. I liked Sam Darnold. I didn't love him. I've always been a little, and this is part of the Trey Lance thing too, which I was really kind of blown away. The 49ers made that move in 2021 when you really laid it out and you didn't put names to it. And everyone loves Trey Lance and he's a good dude. And, people have their number 5 jerseys, but when you take the names out of it, and you just explain what Sam Darnold was, you can see why you would draft him high, and he had talent, but it wasn't otherworldly physical ability. And he only was really good for 1 year. And that's what really kills me with any of these. I get really worried when I only see a prospect play 1 year of college.
You're
football.
The Bill Parcells school of thought.
It's not even because Parcells is crazy. Like you can't even get a Parcells prospect. Brock Purdy was a Parcells. But that's the thing is you don't get a Parcells guy who's the top of the first round guy because nobody stays for 4 years and nobody plays that much. And, and so all these underclassmen coming out, but you need it. To me, I would have a sort of an altered Parcells commandments when drafting quarterbacks. And I would need at least 2 years of starting experience. I think that's really key just to go through multiple off seasons as the guy. You are the face of that college franchise, basically. And look, it's minor league football. That's how I treat college football as minor league football. And they're getting paid, more than minor league baseball players are at this point. So, but you got to play ball and you got to be a leader and go through what it's like to be the guy for a franchise and not just win a bunch of games because your team's better than the other team and you played 1 year of ball. And when you explain what Trey Lance is, and just take the names out of it and you say, okay, here's a prospect that played for the Alabama of Division I AA. And especially now we know how good, we already knew how good that team was because they won titles before Trey Lance and they won with Trey Lance and his numbers were ridiculous and his tape was good and he's obviously athletic and had all the traits and that's all fine. But when you explain who he is and where he played and all of that, and you look at the talent that they were going up against every week with that team, and he had a half a dozen NFL players on just his offense.
Yeah, I've gone through and graded 3 of them this year that he played with, a tight end, a tackle, and a fullback.
Right. And then last year, a top 40 wide receiver in Christian Watson, who was a stud for him. And he stood out to when I watched Trey Lance. I was like, who's number 1? I was really excited about him.
He's a buff dude.
Yeah. And so he's a dude. Another 2 other offensive linemen that were drafted high, one in the 2nd round, and another one, I think in the 4th round last year, Cordell Volson, right? It was a 4th rounder maybe. So like there's a half a dozen NFL guys and Trey Lance going against most defenses that didn't have a single NFL guy on it.
Playing against me. It was almost playing against me out there.
Right. It was like, well, maybe not even. Come on. You're
I appreciate that. Yeah, you got to flex on him.
You're a D1 guy, not D1 AA.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
It's just when you explain that, and then now, so there's that. So he was, just the level of competition. His team was so much better than everybody else's teams in college. So that was kind of easier maybe than it should be in some ways. Then you say, okay, well, now he's got to take the extra step up. So now he's skipping, D1, Power 5, SEC, straight to the NFL. So now I got to get used to that. Now competition is so much better. Speed of the game that's a huge jump already going from 1 AA to the NFL. And then you look at, okay, so we only started for 1 year. And here's the kicker is that year he started in college wasn't even the year before the draft. It was the year before. So that's one of the things when you're looking at tape and you kind of trick yourself because time-wise, you're not looking at that fall. You're looking at 2 falls ago when you're looking at Trey Lance just leading up to the draft. And so,
it wasn't like he held out either. It was COVID and they changed their whole season. Like it had nothing to do with Trey.
Right.
It's just that he was a victim of circumstance.
It wasn't his fault at all, but you have to factor in all of those things that the tape you're looking at isn't even this year's tape. That was last year's tape and he didn't play this year. So that's a year off. And then you're going to say, okay, so we drafted this unique unicorn of a prospect that's never happened. The only player that I could come up with, and in the chat, maybe someone can come up with another one, or John, maybe you've got one. The only player I could come up with that has ever been drafted, and not even drafted in the 1st round, drafted period ever, a quarterback that didn't start for the season before his draft class. Matt Castle is the only one that I could come up with. He was a 7th round pick behind historically great USC offense and Matt Leinart, top 10 pick, and he was the backup there. He was a 7th round pick. I can't think of another guy, let alone top 3 pick in the draft, let alone 1st rounder, drafted period, who didn't play the season before he was drafted. That just doesn't happen. So this is a unicorn of a prospect, and the thing he needed the most with his development was reps, and the plan is to sit him for his 1st year. And then next year, he, unfortunately, again, no fault of Trey Lance's, he gets hurt week 2. And so he misses the 2nd year. And then now you're stacking year upon year upon year upon year of not playing and no reps. And it puts him in such a weird place. I've never seen a career arc like Trey Lance's. And he was a unique prospect to begin with. And then sticking him on the 49ers with everything else we've seen. And then the the ridiculous Brock Purdy story out of nowhere as the last pick in the draft. I mean, this is just unbelievable. It's you could not even make up the storylines that have happened with the San Francisco 49ers at quarterback. And we haven't even talked about Jimmy G.
No, and we're going to be seeing him. He's going to be the first quarterback the Niners see with the joint practices just announced in Las Vegas, where they're going to have, a preseason game, but also the joint practices. I think that's going to be hilarious. But I promised we would not do a lot of quarterback talk, so we are going to shift now, if you don't mind, Brian. I got a question from David. And this was kind of a two-part question, but number one, the 49ers currently have 11 draft picks. Pretty solid roster. I think they have 64 players currently signed. If you were the GM, are you in the philosophy that we need more quality picks? Or are you wanting 11 dart throws regardless of where they are, third round and later? If you were building this team through the draft, what do you think your approach should be? Should they be aggressive and trade up for quality, or kind of sit tight and just take as many chances as you can?
I would be mobile for sure. I don't like the idea of being clustered in the third round. What are the odds that you really love 3 players within 4 draft picks between?
They're going to say they love them all.
And 102, right? Yeah. What are the odds that it's like, oh, good, there's only 3 guys here that we really love, and we have them in their tier by themselves, and those are the 3 guys we're going to take in a row right here. And then you have such a huge gap in the 4th round, and then to the 5th round where there's another cluster of picks, and then more picks in the 7th round. Go up 10 picks, go up a dozen picks and get a guy in the 3rd round if there's somebody there that you think is worth getting. And I thought the 49ers missed that opportunity last year when they sat there and drafted a running back in the 3rd round. Go get yourself an offensive lineman 10 picks earlier, right? And if that player's not there, you're not giving away picks for no reason. But I've done one mock draft so far this offseason, a 7-round 49ers mock draft. And what I did was I moved up from 99 and down from 102. To get rid of both of those gaps. So you can earn a pick back by moving down as well from the 3rd round. So you can go up and go down. So then I was picking at 88 88, I think it was 11 picks instead of 99. And then picking 120, 130, whatever, something in the 4th round as well, just to spread those picks out a little bit. So picking earlier 3rd, picking at 101, then picking in the 4th again, and then you're picking in the 5th round. So you're not so bunched up in those places, and being a little bit more mobile in the draft, I think would be smart and make the draft work for you. And I'm always all about that. And the 49ers at this point, there's not 11 spots to be made on that roster. So
no. Last year they got lucky. Only one guy didn't make it that they drafted. That was Tariq Castro Fields, I think 6th round. He landed on the Commanders, but every other person that was drafted made the roster at some thing. So question, you just said no way 11 guys make this team. So are you continuing, and I think it's kind of a twofold answer, are you continuing this red shirt philosophy? What positions do you look at on the current 49ers roster that you say, man, you've got to address this position you're drafting somebody that can play this position now? Are there any positions that stayed out to you where like, man, you got to get draft help for 2023 this year for these spots?
I think they do need depth in the secondary. So I think that's necessary. I think depth at linebacker is also necessary. And both of those positions play a lot of special teams. So, Jordan Willis is gone. He was a special teamer for the 49ers. So I think special teams, guys who can play now, and depth pieces for the roster who could play a role at some point during their rookie seasons. But I think for the most part, and we've seen around the NFL, even guys who make the roster as rookies, more impact happens year 2, 3 than year 1. So you want to be looking ahead. And when you look at the offensive line, they've got needs now. They got needs in the future, especially at offensive tackle. So, it's tackle for me all the way as need number 1. And who knows, maybe it's hard to say a 3rd round rookie would come in and start, but we saw a 4th round rookie last year and Spencer Burford come in and start games. And so if that's where I'm talking about, if there's the right guy and you think the end of a tier is happening in the 3rd round, go get that offensive tackle, because you have a need at tackle now to compete. You have a need at swing tackle to compete there. And Trent Williams might not be around for all that long, so you have a need in the future as well on the other side at offensive tackle. So you need depth and you need potentially a starter. And if you can find that in this draft, I think you got to try to go attack that. But linebacker, DB, in multiple spots, I mean, they don't have a true backup free safety really right now coming into the season. So
he owed him, but we saw him for like 2 drives and they both went really bad real quick.
And there's, and a lot of youth that we don't really know what kind of players they are in the secondary behind the starters. and then a lot of short contracts as well. So, yeah, safety is a big one. Outside corner, probably nickel feels okay now with Oliver and Sam Womack because I like both of them. But some versatility maybe in the secondary. There are some needs for the 49ers, and I'm sure they're going to come out of this draft with the kicker because I don't think Zane Gonzalez, Zane Gonzalez is fine. And I like that they've added some of these players, dude, and brace for it because not only are they going to draft a kicker, it might be a pick 102. They might not leave day 2 without a kicker, right?
Gosh,
and that's what
that
I
would
like
be
about
interesting.
that's what I like about the Zane Gonzalez move because it didn't cost him anything. He might not make the roster, and that conditional pick goes away. It basically they've done a good job of adding really inexpensive parts to give them some depth in a lot of places, so they're not forced into doing something specific, which is where bad things can happen in the draft and forcing picks because of need. And I'm really happy about that at kicker. So they don't have to sit there in the 3rd round because you know how the 49ers are. You know how competitive they are. We saw them do it with punter a few years ago. Like, well, we need this position, and we're afraid that somebody's going to take the one guy we like the most.
And he always says, we didn't think anybody else could make our roster at that point, so
correct.
That's why we did this. He said that today, too. He said that today.
He said that in 2019, which was ballsy because they had the 2nd pick in the draft that year. They were the 2nd worst team in the entire NFL. He's like, I don't know if we got any spots for anybody. And then it turned out they went to the Super Bowl, so he was kind of right. They're a lot better than we thought in 2019. But when you look at kicker, if the 49ers went into the draft and didn't have a kicker, you could really easily see where they would say, man, we've got this big gap between 3rd and 5th round. Someone might take a kicker in the 4th round. So we just got to take him right now. And now they don't really have to do that because they got Zane Gonzalez. They know they have a kicker. They don't have to force it. And they could draft a guy. And I'm sure, 5th, 7th round, I'm sure they'll draft a guy or at least bring in an undrafted kicker.
I'd be cool with the 7th. I 5th, I'm like, whatever. And then 3rd, I'd be like, what the, like, I don't know. I get kickers are valuable. I just don't know, man. And, to stick with your kind of what you just said a while ago, we saw the same thing at edge rusher last year. Remember, they signed Kamiko Toure like 3 days before the draft. And so it seemed like it alleviated. They could just go with whoever the hell they wanted in the 2nd round. But sure enough, they went edge with Drake Jackson, and then Kamiko never really played. And so it alleviates, like you said, the desperation need pick to where you can just kind of go with the flow, which, whenever I post anything about, mock drafts or who should the 49ers pick, the 1st and 2nd comment is always best player available, BPA. But the Niners don't tend to do that. It seems like their early picks are all O-line, D-line, or a position of need. Do you agree that will continue, or do you see them maybe doing something a little different this year?
Yeah, that's pretty much been their MO. So I would expect them to target those need positions we talked about, even though they've got bodies there. So, there might not be as much desperation. That's a good word for what they've taken away with some of these signings. And yeah, a lot of these guys could potentially not even make the final 53, depending on what the rookies look like, depending on how things go. And, if they don't like the way the roster shapes up after the draft, they could also, go back into the free agent market in the summertime before camp and find somebody else that's maybe a bigger name that's still out there. Basically like Tashawn Gibson was for basically free. They got a starting really good safety for nothing. And so you can find those players out there in the summertime too that didn't get signed the rest of the offseason. So
it got weird right there. And he jumped in and he had the most snaps of any player on the defensive side of the ball for the 49ers. It was so weird.
Just rock solid, always in the right place. I was blown away. And that's the other thing too about safety is that was the position we were worried about. And part of it was, man, a complete unknown, maybe could be a liability in coverage in Hufanga. Don't really know what he's going to be. And then Jimmy Ward with his injury history, if he gets hurt, where the 49ers are going to be. And that scenario played out, and the 49ers were great at safety. Hufanga was awesome. He did have some problems, and I think his press clippings might be even better than he actually was, even though he was really good. But Tashawn Gibson comes in, and the 49ers are fine. And they've kind of been great at safety, even with Jaquiski Tart. And part of it's because of how good they are up front, how well coached the defense is. But Tart was a starter, really good player. It was like, man, losing Tart, it's going to be a tough one. And he could barely find a job. And he was awesome on the 49ers. So everybody that plug in at safety is great. So maybe we just stop worrying about safety because no matter who you put back there is good.
I remember everybody you talked about the 3rd round Ty Davis Price pick. Everybody was upset. We were doing a live draft in Vegas where we were covering it live and we had a huge party, which was really, really cool. Everybody was pissed. everybody was furious at the draft party we were throwing. And it was because they all wanted a safety. They didn't even draft a safety. They didn't touch the position. I don't know. It was interesting. We got a question here from Josh, 49ers faithful forever. He says, Brian, who is your draft crush this year? Not sure how much you dove into the film, but is there somebody that you're just like, I like this guy way more than everybody else?
Yeah, I'm not really. I haven't seen enough prospects and gone deep enough with enough to have a true like draft crush where we're at. Just looking around at some of the players that I think could be available around the pick 100 area where the 49ers are drafting there late in the third round. I mean, Blake Freeland's an obvious one just because he's so athletic at tackle. Would seem to be a good fit with the 49ers. Projectable upside, could be a potential starter at either tackle spot. I like that. I really, a lot of 49ers fans like Blake Freeland. He's been a popular name for 49ers fans. And I also don't think he's going to sniff pick 100. I think I see him there in a lot of mock drafts. I think he's going to go closer to pick 50 than pick 100. That's just my opinion. But if he was somewhere around there, and that's the player I had the 49ers moving up a dozen picks to grab in my mock draft, because I think they would have to be aggressive to go get their offensive tackle, because it's going to be tough to find a guy that's got those traits that fall there late into the third round. And the guy that's getting no pub, I'll give you a couple more names. Two guys that were combine snubs that haven't got a lot of pub yet. One is Carl Brooks out of Bowling Green. I think he's a perfect 3 technique fit for the 49ers. Now, they don't have much of a need for defensive tackle anymore, because that mock draft I did, that was before free agency, and I was completely shocked that they went and paid Javon Hargrave, who I love. It was a fantastic signing, perfect fit for the 49ers and what they need. So suddenly they're really deep and really good at defensive tackle. And, he's got some flexibility, but I really like Carl Brooks. Might not be the biggest need for the 49ers at this point for a bigger, big end or 3 technique defensive lineman. But I'll give you one more name on day 3 out of the Hornet out of Sacramento State, Marte Mapu. It's kind of a safety linebacker hybrid, but that's how the 49ers like their linebackers. Dude is athletic. Dude reminds me a little bit of, everything that the 49ers have there, Dre Greenlaw. And I don't want to put those names on him like Greenlaw and Fred Warner, but that's the type of athlete he is. That's the type of prospect he is. 217-pound safety that's going to play linebacker, I think, in the NFL, that flies around, makes plays, can move around, can cover tight ends, can cover running backs, modern day linebacker, and built the way the 49ers like their linebackers. And he's a local kid playing down the road in Sacramento. So I think that means Sacramento State players can go to the 49ers local pro day too. But even though he's a combine snub, I want to see how he works out. And I have a feeling some teams really like him a lot more than he's getting publicity for right now. But Marte Mapu out of Sacramento State is a good one for the 49ers on day 3. If they want to keep that consistent flow of 5th round starting caliber players, I think he would be one.
And that's the thing. Like, you talk about the positions. You talked about a defensive tackle. You talked about an offensive tackle and a linebacker. The Niners are loaded at some of these spots where it's just like, good gosh. You look at the linebacker spot, and they got Marcelino McCrary-Ball from last year. He got the biggest signing bonus of any of the undrafted free agents. Curtis Robinson made the initial 53-man roster last year. You remember they put him on IR and then brought him back and kind of wasted one of their 8.
Yeah.
Whatever. But so my question, the Niners redshirt players and the undrafted players kind of fall into this. Is there any second-year sophomore player that perhaps we haven't seen much of? Taylor Hawkins, Quantrez Knight, that's kind of my guy. Is there somebody that you could see stepping up and pressing, like we saw Emmanuel Mosley be an undrafted free agent, get a job, Azeez free agent, get a job, all these different guys? Is there somebody in their second year that you're excited to see kind of their development this year?
Yeah, I got a good scenario for you. And this is on the offensive line. And it's Jason Poe, who was one of my favorites last year in camp. Love seeing the way he moves around. What if in the end it doesn't end up being Colton McKivitz and Spencer Burford who kicks out the tackle, and Jason Poe ends up being the guard for the 49ers, coming out of nowhere from the practice squad. He was a really good practice squad player for the 49ers last year. I was surprised that he didn't get snatched up by another team when they tried to put him on waivers. And John Lynch said that he was one of the guys that they were sweating a little bit and didn't know if he was going to make it. And he did make it to their practice squad. So he's a really interesting one for me to take a big year 2 leap. I think there's a lot of guys that could be that. Drake Jackson, of course, has to be a big one. I see in the chat here, Sam Womack as well. Absolutely. The 49ers could have a really good sophomore class, actually, because you could be talking about multiple starting caliber players there that come from that to go with Spencer Burford, who was already starting last year for the 49ers. And obviously his path is clear to not have anybody like Daniel Brunskill breathing down his neck for any starts either. So Burford to right tackle is an interesting one there that I think has a real possibility. And maybe that's a sneaky plan that the 49ers are going to try, or at least give them some looks there to see if that's a possibility, because doesn't it feel like, John, that they're a little bit too cool with letting their starting right tackle leave in free agency and not really do anything obvious to replace him?
There's a lot of bodies at the tackle position, right? Jalen Moore, Colton McKivitz, they've been in the system. Mm-hmm. They've kind of both gotten starts. Nick Zakel's done some tackle work, but I don't think he's going to be in that mix. And then you bring in, they just signed what was his name? Matt Pryor out of TCU. So like they've got bodies, but I would argue not a lot of quality. It scares me, but I go back to when McGlinchey got hurt. I think it was 2021. And Tom Compton came in, and it was just like there was no drop off.
He had like a really bad beginning. Like it was either half a game or right at the beginning. It was like, oh no, this is going to be a disaster. And all of a sudden, it's like, okay, no, it's going to be okay. and offensive line's one of those where if you find a tough, smart guy that has like just the base level, physical ability, but he's really tough and smart, and you can get by there. So maybe that's what the 49ers are just hoping for. Like, look, we're going to be tough and smart. Here's a question I have for you, John.
Oh, I like it.
Does it seem like the 49ers are really shifting? And this has been ongoing now for a while, but you're starting to like add these up year after year now with Aaron Banks and with Matt Pryor and Feliciano. They're getting bigger and heavier on the offensive line. Are they going to get totally away from the old school outside zone, light, quick Shanahan offensive lineman?
Man, I used to be able to just like literally with a Sharpie, not watching his film, watching his film. Nope. 330 plus, you're out of here, buddy. But now you can't do it. And it does seem like even with the running backs, because it was a transition that's taken place with the linemen. And now you're getting away from those 4.3 speed guys, and you're getting Ty Davis Price, Trey Sermon, these bigger bodied kind of, chain movers. And then I think this all kind of coincided with the move to Trey Lance, because they were wanting to move to this, hey, we're going to be a power zone team, if that makes sense, but also keep the same tenets of the Shanahan scheme. I don't know. It's a little hybrid. I don't think we're going to be going straight to a gap scheme, though. But
they're clearly leaning in that direction, or trying to accomplish something by being bullies, right? And I think that's pretty obvious. But at the same time, it's not working because the littler guys are still the better running backs, and the 230-pounders that they're drafting in the third round aren't making an impact at all. Jordan Mason, undrafted, still 220, is a nice thumper, and it's kind of looking at him as the closer for this backfield. But then they bring in Christian McCaffrey, who's 205, right? And so, and then they draft Aaron Banks, and then they're like, oh yeah, but actually we don't like you. We want you to change your body completely and be lighter and quicker on your feet. Well, it's like, what are you doing? So it's like they are, but they kind of aren't.
They want the wide frame.
Yeah.
They want the wide frame. Then they want to put them on Weight Watchers. They want the best of both worlds, man.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so it's funny because still the more nimble, athletic guys are still the ones in the running game that are winning out, and it's the bigger, heavier guys that aren't working out as well for the 49ers. And we even saw that with Javon Kinlaw. They got the biggest guy they could there, and then he's smaller than he was before last year, and still can't get it going. But that's for some other reasons as well. Consistency is a big problem, but obviously it's injuries with him. It's not necessarily size. So I don't know. It's really weird. They're trying to do something, and I don't know if it's completely working, but it's almost to this point where I don't know what type of offensive lineman or running back they want. I know what kind I think they should be wanting, but I don't know what kind they actually do want and will draft.
It's funny. I'm doing my interior offensive line right now for draft work, and I've already done all my profiles, but now I'm ranking them vertically. And I totally have like Trent Baalke PSD because I'll be looking at their arm length and I'm like, nope, okay, he didn't fit back then. Nope, he's too heavy, won't fit now. Like it's like I've got all this like trauma from my past GM relationships that like you see these filters of these players and they fit with some schemes and they don't fit with others. But now, man, Shanahan's changing trends, and so we'll see. Just means we get to watch more film, right, Brian?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's really just wild to see the direction they've gone. And I don't know if I can pinpoint, and I wish I love the 49ers beat reporters too, but I wish they would ask John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan more specifically about their process in the draft and why they're so good in rounds 5 through 7, but really pedestrian as far as hit rates go with earlier picks, whereas they should be getting better. Like you can't. We talked about this with Rand Carthon, and I talked to Tyler Rowland, who does the Locked On Titans podcast, and he's like, tell us about Rand Carthon, and he's like, what's he going to bring over? And he's like, well, I think the 49ers have a good system, and there's a lot to like about the 49ers and the way they built their roster and their team, but at the same time, you can't write the book of how to build a roster the way the 49ers have done it. Like do completely weird crap at quarterback, trade picks and spend money on quarterback only to have a
erratic,
the best
it's
guy.
Not consistent.
You have to be historically great in rounds 5 through 7, where most people have trouble finding guys who can make a roster. But you have to be great there and find starters, and you can be spotty in the early rounds. Like you just can't write the handbook that way. That's you can't emulate it at all. And I worry that the 49ers would potentially would run dry. And I don't want to call it luck because they're doing something right in the late rounds. But what if all of a sudden for a couple drafts, they don't hit with those later picks? And like this year, that's all they have is the later picks.
You saw that happen with Seattle. You said
right.
What
does the roster start to look like? We saw it with the New England Patriots as well.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting the way they've team built. And I would love to know a deeper, and it sucks because teams are so secretive about the draft. But I would like to know a lot more about the 49ers process and how they've been so historically good, or if it's just been dumb luck with their hit rates in different rounds.
Yeah, I like that. This is not a question for me, but I have to ask you because Derek brought it up. I have no choice here, Brian. When is BD Peacock coming out for a Rush road trip, man?
I'll tell you when. Sometime during the 2023 season.
Oh, that's what's up, man. Because you'll attend a couple local games, right?
Yeah, I've been to less and less games. I've been doing a lot of daddy daycare at home, so working from home has been a blessing, and it's been rough at the same time because I do get stuck here, and I've got to be with my little dude, which I love, and I got to be able to pick him up and take him to school and do all that stuff in between podcasts, and so it's harder for me to get away. But I think this season, especially with my son going into kindergarten, we're going to have a little bit better school situation where I can get a little freed up on, like Mondays, especially if I'm doing a trip out of town Sunday, Monday, something like that. And I also really like being able to podcast immediately from here, my studio, after the games. So sometime in reality, the way I do it as a podcaster, it benefits me more to be home during the games than actually at the stadium watching the games. And unfortunately, just the way that stadiums are built these days and the way teams are covered, there was no way for teams to know when they're building stadiums that they needed to build 12 podcast studios, little podcast closets for the beat writers and the folks to do podcasts, because they didn't see that coming, So it's great to write a story at the stadium and be there and get audio. But for me, it's actually better to be home and be able to hop on live right away and do a podcast after watching the broadcast of it.
I get that, man. Usually I'm a couple beers deep and walking in a mob of people as I got my cell phone going and people are jumping on you and whatever else. It creates an interesting atmosphere, but I totally understand. And man, we've had Croc out to quite a few of our things. It seems like he's a mainstay, which is awesome. But it would be wonderful to kind of have a beer and party with you a little bit. I know everybody wants to meet you, the celebrity that is Brian. But Brian, before we jump out of here, I just want to say thank you for your time. Go ahead and, man, pump your stuff because, good Lord, is this your third or fourth show today? I'm curious.
This is 4 for me. I did an extra one earlier as well. So yeah, it's fun, man. doing the daily podcast thing on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's year 6 for me at Locked On, which is crazy. Seeing this thing grow and building it into such a big podcast with Locked On 49ers. So I'm doing Locked On 49ers every day. You can find it 5 days a week in the morning in your podcast feeds. You can find us on YouTube as well. And then I'm doing the Peacock and Williamson NFL show daily on the Locked On Podcast Network. Myself and Matt Williamson, he's a former NFL scout, scouted with the Browns, college scout as well. Former ESPN writer. You probably remember some of his work and actually some of his podcast stuff way back in the day, in the early days of podcasting. There was a podcast. It was like the only podcast about the NFL. It was called NFL Today or something like that. I can't remember what it's called, but back in the 2000s when they were doing podcasts, the mid 2000s when the podcast game was much different than it is now and unmonetizable. He was doing podcast game at ESPN, and he also does work with the Steelers now. He covers the Steelers and does work at Steelers.com. So Matt Williamson and I cover the entire NFL every day on the Locked On Podcast Network.
It's one of my go-tos, man. It's
thank you. I appreciate it.
Good work as always.
By the way, so most people watch you on YouTube and love your YouTube show. So anybody out there, make sure you go subscribe to our YouTube channels, especially the Peacock and Williamson show, brand new YouTube channel. We used to be under the Locked On NFL umbrella. Now we're just on the Peacock and Williamson YouTube channel.
You got that contract restructure and you're like, branding, baby. I love it. Well deserved, man.
Got to get from under the umbrella.
That's right, man. I love it. Well, Brian, you are incredible. Thank you so much for your time and all you do for the community. That's going to do it for us. Go listen to all of his shows. He's the best there is. And until next time, stay strong, faithful.